I buried my husband on a Tuesday. The sky was that kind of gray that makes everything look washed out, like God himself couldn't be bothered to add color to the day we said goodbye to David. 53 years we had together. 53 years of shared coffee cups, arguments over the thermostat, vacations to the same beach house in Cape Cod every summer. And then, just like that, he was gone. Heart attack. No warning. One minute he was laughing at something on the television, the next he was on the floor, and I was screaming into the phone for an ambulance that arrived too late. The funeral was packed. David had been a financial advisor for nearly 30 years, and it seemed like every client he'd ever had showed up to pay their respects. I stood there in my black dress, the same one I'd worn to my mother's funeral, and I shook hands with people whose faces blurred together. Everyone said the same things. He was a good man. He'll be missed. If you need anything, anything at all. But when you're drowning, those words are just noise. White noise that doesn't pull you to the surface. My daughter Emily stood beside me the whole time, her hand gripping mine so tight I thought my bones might crack. She's 31 now, married to a man named Trevor who works in tech and wears expensive watches. They live in one of those new developments where all the houses look the same, and everyone drives a white SUV. Emily kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her mascara running in thin black rivers down her cheeks. Trevor stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, looking appropriately somber but also slightly impatient, like he had somewhere else to be. If you've ever lost someone you built your entire life around, you know exactly how I felt standing there. Everything felt hollow. The handshakes, the casseroles people brought over, the cards with their carefully chosen words of sympathy. It all felt like I was watching it happen to someone else. I was just a body going through motions. But here's the thing. If you're watching this right now, wherever you are in the world, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Because what I'm about to tell you, what happened after that funeral, it's the kind of story that sounds made up. Except it isn't. Every word of this is true. And if you've ever been blindsided by grief, or betrayed by someone you trusted, or felt like the ground was ripped out from under you, you need to hear this. Hit that subscribe button, because this story has twists that'll make your head spin. And check the description box below for more stories like this one. Stories about real people facing impossible situations. 3 days after we buried David, I was sitting in our kitchen. Our kitchen. I still couldn't say my kitchen. The house felt too big, too quiet. I'd been going through David's things, trying to sort out the mess of paperwork he'd left behind. Bank statements, client files, investment portfolios. He'd always handled all of it. I barely knew where to start. Emily had offered to help, but I told her I needed to do it myself. Maybe I thought going through his stuff would make me feel closer to him. Maybe I was just being stubborn. It was late afternoon, and the light coming through the kitchen window had that golden quality that makes everything look softer than it really is. I was holding a mug of tea I hadn't touched, staring at a stack of folders, when my phone buzzed on the counter. A text message. Unknown number. Mrs. Patterson, this is Lawrence Whitmore. I was one of David's clients. I need to speak with you urgently. There's something you need to know. Lawrence Whitmore. The name was vaguely familiar, but David had dozens of clients. I couldn't place him. I stared at the message, my heart doing this strange flutter thing it had been doing since David died. Everything felt like a potential crisis. A text message. A phone call. A knock on the door. I'd become a person who expected disaster. I typed back, my fingers shaky. Can this wait? I'm still dealing with funeral arrangements and estate matters. The response came immediately. No. This cannot wait. I've uncovered something disturbing about David's financial dealings. We need to meet. Today if possible. My stomach dropped. Financial dealings. What did that mean? David was meticulous, honest to a fault. He'd built his reputation on integrity. I felt this surge of defensive anger. Who was this Lawrence Whitmore to suggest there was something wrong with my husband's work? I typed back, more firmly this time. What exactly are you implying? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, not over text. This needs to be handled carefully. Can you come to my estate? I'm in Brookfield, About 40 minutes from you. I'll send you the address. Brookfield. That's where the old money lived, the kind of people who had generational wealth and properties with names instead of just addresses. David had mentioned a few high-net-worth clients out there, but he never talked much about individual clients. Confidentiality was everything in his line of work. Before I could respond, another message came through. Please, Mrs. Patterson. This is important. And I need you to come alone. Don't tell your daughter. Don't tell anyone. Just trust me on this. Don't tell Emily? That made my skin prickle. Why wouldn't I tell my own daughter? What kind of thing was so serious that it required secrecy from my own family? I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling that flutter in my chest turn into a full-on hammering. Part of me wanted to delete the messages and pretend they'd never arrived. Part of me was already grabbing my car keys. I drove to Brookfield in a daze. The address Lawrence Whitmore had sent led me to a gated estate with stone pillars and an intercom system. I pressed the button and gave my name, and the gate swung open like something out of a movie. The driveway was lined with old oak trees, their branches creating a canopy overhead. The house itself was massive, brick and stone, with ivy climbing up one side and windows that probably cost more than my first car. I parked in the circular driveway and sat there for a moment, my hands still gripping the steering wheel. What was I doing here? What could this man possibly have to tell me about David that required this level of secrecy and drama? I got out of the car and walked toward the front entrance, my heels clicking on the stone pathway. That's when I saw someone standing by the side of the house, partially hidden by a row of perfectly trimmed hedges. At first, I couldn't make out who it was. The sun was behind them, creating a silhouette. But as I got closer, as my eyes adjusted and the figure stepped forward, recognition hit me like a punch to the gut. It was Trevor, my son-in-law, Emily's husband, standing there at Lawrence Whitmore's estate, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise, fear, guilt. And in that moment, in that split second before either of us spoke, I knew. I knew that whatever was about to happen, whatever I was about to learn, it was going to shatter everything I thought I knew about my life, my husband and my family. I couldn't breathe. Trevor opened his mouth, then closed it again. For a man who made his living talking confidently about cryptocurrencies and market trends, he suddenly looked like a teenager caught sneaking in past curfew. I stood there on that perfect stone pathway, surrounded by Lawrence Whitmore's perfectly manicured estate, and felt the world tilt sideways. Margaret, Trevor finally said, and his voice had this strained quality to it. I can explain. Explain what? My voice came out sharper than I intended. Explain why you're here when I was told specifically not to tell anyone, including you? Explain why my daughter's husband is standing at a stranger's house 3 days after my husband's funeral. Before Trevor could answer, the front door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall, probably in his late 60s, with silver hair combed back and the kind of presence that comes from decades of being the richest person in any room. He wore a casual sweater and slacks, but everything about him screamed money. Old money. The kind that whispers instead of shouts. Mrs. Patterson, he said, extending his hand. Lawrence Whitmore. Thank you for coming on such short notice. And under such difficult circumstances. I didn't take his hand. I was still staring at Trevor. Why is he here? Lawrence glanced at Trevor, then back at me. Please. Come inside. All of this will make sense, I promise you. But we need to have this conversation somewhere private. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in my car and drive away. To call Emily. To demand answers right there on the driveway. But there was something in Lawrence Whitmore's expression. Not just concern but urgency. The kind of urgency that makes you understand that whatever is happening is bigger than your confusion or your anger. I followed them inside. The interior of the house was exactly what you'd expect. High ceilings. Artwork that probably belonged in museums. Furniture that looked expensive to even sit on. Lawrence led us to a study with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and windows overlooking a garden that looked like it required a full-time staff. Sit, Lawrence said, gesturing to a leather chair. Trevor remained standing by the door, his hands shoved in his pockets, still looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. I sat, but I kept my purse in my lap, ready to bolt if I needed to. I want to know what's going on. Right now. Lawrence walked over to a large mahogany desk and picked up a manila folder. He held it for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Mrs. Patterson, I was one of your husband's clients for almost 15 years. David managed a significant portion of my investment portfolio. He was brilliant at his job. Ethical. Trustworthy. Which is why what I discovered last week has been so difficult to process. My hands tightened around my purse. What did you discover? David was moving money, Lawrence said quietly. Large amounts of money. From my accounts, from other clients' accounts. Systematically. For the past 18 months. The words hit me like ice water. That's impossible. David would never. I know how it sounds, Lawrence interrupted gently. Believe me, I didn't want to believe it either. But I have the records. Transactions that make no sense. Money being transferred to offshore accounts, then moved again, layered through shell companies. It's sophisticated work. The kind of thing that takes planning. I felt like I was going to be sick. You're saying my husband was stealing from you? Not just from me. From at least 6 other clients that I've identified so far. We're talking about millions of dollars, Margaret. The room spun. This couldn't be real. David? My David? The man who still carried cash to tip service workers because he thought it was more personal than credit cards? The man who cried during sentimental commercials and spent his Saturdays volunteering to teach financial literacy to high school students? No, I said firmly. No. You're wrong. David wouldn't do this. There has to be another explanation. That's when Trevor finally spoke up. Margaret, I found out about this 2 months ago. I whipped around to look at him. What? Trevor stepped forward, his face pale. David came to me. He was panicking. He told me he'd gotten involved in something that had spiraled out of control. He said he needed help, that he was trying to fix it before anyone found out. And you didn't tell me? My voice rose. You didn't tell Emily? He made me promise not to. He said it would destroy you. Destroy Emily. He was trying to protect you. Trevor ran a hand through his hair. He asked me to help him move some funds around, restructure some things. I work in fintech, so I have access to platforms he didn't. I thought I was helping him fix a mistake. I stood up so fast the chair nearly tipped over. You helped him steal money? No. I didn't know it was stolen at first. He told me he'd made some bad investments and needed to recover losses before clients noticed. He said it was temporary, that he'd pay everything back. By the time I realized what was really happening, I was already implicated. Lawrence cleared his throat. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to understand something. I don't believe David was the mastermind here. The sophistication of these transactions, the way the money was moved, it suggests someone with more technical expertise than a traditional financial advisor would have. Someone like Trevor. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Trevor's face went from pale to bright red. Are you seriously suggesting I manipulated David? That I used him to steal from his own clients? I'm suggesting, Lawrence said calmly, that the evidence points to a partnership. Whether it started with David or with you, I don't know. But what I do know is that millions of dollars are missing, and the two of you are the common thread. I looked back and forth between them, feeling like I was drowning. This couldn't be happening. 3 days ago, I'd buried my husband. 3 days ago, my biggest worry was how to go on living without him. And now I was standing in a stranger's house, being told that the man I'd shared my life with was either a thief or a patsy. And that my son-in-law, the man my daughter loved, might have been the one pulling the strings. If you're still watching this, if you've stuck with me through this nightmare, hit that like button. Because I need you to understand something. When your world falls apart, it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers. Each revelation peels back another piece of reality until you don't recognize anything anymore. And if you think this is twisted, just wait. Check the description box for more stories like this, Because what happened next made me question everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and revenge. "There's more," Lawrence said, and his tone made my blood run cold. He opened the manila folder and pulled out a photograph. This was taken 6 weeks before David died, at a hotel in Boston. He handed me the photograph. It took my brain a moment to process what I was seeing. David, my husband, standing outside a hotel with a woman I didn't recognize. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair and a smile that made my stomach turn. David's hand was on her lower back. The gesture was intimate, familiar. "Who is she?" I whispered. "Her name is Natalie Cross," Lawrence said. "She worked for one of the shell companies that was receiving the stolen funds. I believe she was David's accomplice. Possibly more than that." More than that. The words echoed in my head. I stared at the photograph, at my husband's face, at the way he was looking at this woman. And I realized that I was staring at a stranger. This wasn't the David I'd known. This was someone else entirely. "Where is she now?" I heard myself ask. "That's the thing," Lawrence said. "She disappeared. Right after David died. The trail goes cold. Which makes me think she knows exactly what happened and doesn't want to be found." I sat back down, my legs unable to hold me anymore. Trevor was saying something, defending himself, but I couldn't hear him over the roaring in my ears. Everything I'd believed, everything I'd built my identity around for more than 5 decades, was a lie. My faithful husband. My stable life. My safe, predictable future. Gone. All of it. Revealed as nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. And sitting there in Lawrence Whitmore's study, holding a photograph of my dead husband with his mistress, I felt something shift inside me. The grief that had consumed me for 3 days began to transform into something else. Something harder. Colder. Anger. Pure, crystalline anger. Lawrence Whitmore's study felt smaller than it had moments before, like the walls were pressing in. I couldn't stop staring at the photograph. David's hand on that woman's back. The easy smile on his face. He looked happy. Relaxed. Like he had nothing to hide and no guilt weighing on him. Meanwhile, during those same weeks, I'd been at home planning our anniversary dinner, picking out a card, trying to decide if we should finally take that trip to Italy we'd been talking about for years. "Mrs. Patterson," Lawrence said gently, "I know this is overwhelming. But I need you to focus. If David was involved in this, and if Trevor was helping him, then there are legal implications. For all of you." I looked up at him, my vision blurry with unshed tears I refused to let fall. "What kind of legal implications?" "The kind that could result in criminal charges. Asset seizure. Jail time." He paused. "And if the authorities determine that you benefited from the stolen funds, even unknowingly, you could be held liable." The anger that had been building inside me sharpened into something like panic. I didn't know anything about this. I didn't touch David's work. He handled all the finances. "I believe you," Lawrence said. "But belief isn't the same as proof. The prosecutors won't care about your intentions. They'll care about where the money went and who it benefited." Trevor finally moved away from the door, his voice defensive. "This is insane. David told me he was fixing his own mistakes. I had no idea there were other clients involved. I thought it was just internal shuffling." Lawrence's expression hardened. "Then explain why you set up 3 of the shell companies that received the funds. Explain why your signature is on transfer authorizations. Explain why you were photographed meeting with Natalie Cross just 2 weeks ago." The room went silent. I turned slowly to look at Trevor, and the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. Guilt. Not the guilt of an innocent man wrongly accused, but the guilt of someone who'd been caught. "Margaret, I swear I didn't," Trevor started, but I cut him off. "Does Emily know?" My voice was steady, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Does my daughter know what you've done?" Trevor's jaw worked, but no words came out. He looked trapped. Cornered. "No," he finally said. "She doesn't know. And she can't find out. This would destroy her." Destroy her? I stood up again, and this time I felt steady. Grounded in a way I hadn't since David died. You destroy her. You and your schemes and your lies. How much did you steal? How much did you take while sitting at our dinner table, pretending to be family? It wasn't supposed to happen this way, Trevor said, and for the first time, I heard something like desperation in his voice. David approached me. He was in over his head with some bad investments. He'd lost money for a major client, and he was panicking. I helped him create a structure to borrow from other accounts temporarily, just to cover the losses until he could recover the funds. It was supposed to be short-term. But it wasn't, Lawrence interjected. It turned into a systematic theft. And then you brought in Natalie Cross to help launder the money. Trevor's hands clenched into fists. Natalie was supposed to help us clean everything up. She had expertise in international transfers, in creating paper trails that looked legitimate. But then David got sloppy. He started skimming more, taking risks. I tried to pull back, but he threatened to expose me. Said if he went down, I was going down with him. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed made me feel sick. So what happened? Did you kill him? The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Trevor's eyes went wide. What? No. Jesus, Margaret, no. David had a heart attack. You were there. The paramedics said it was natural causes. Natural causes, I repeated slowly. Or convenient timing. Your partner gets sloppy, threatens to drag you down with him, and suddenly he drops dead before the whole scheme unravels. You can't be serious. I don't know what I am anymore. The words exploded out of me. I don't know what's real. My husband was a thief. My son-in-law is a criminal. And now I'm supposed to believe it's all just a coincidence? That David's heart just happened to give out at exactly the right moment. Lawrence stepped between us, his hands raised. Let's all take a breath. Accusations without evidence help no one. What we need to focus on is damage control. The money needs to be returned. Discreetly. And we need to find Natalie Cross before she disappears with everything. Why would she disappear? I asked. If she was helping launder the money, wouldn't she have already taken her cut? Lawrence pulled out another document from his folder. That's what I thought too. But look at this. 2 days before David died, someone initiated a transfer of $8 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account is in Natalie's name. David's login credentials were used to authorize the transfer. Trevor leaned forward to look at the document, and I watched his face go pale. 8 million? That's nearly everything. That's the bulk of what was taken. Exactly, Lawrence said. Which suggests that someone decided to cut and run. The question is whether it was David planning to disappear with Natalie, or whether Natalie decided to cut David out of the picture entirely. I thought about the photograph again. The intimacy between David and this woman. Had he been planning to leave me? After 53 years, had he been ready to throw it all away for a younger woman and a pile of stolen money? The thought made something inside me crack. We need to find her, I said, my voice hard. We need to find Natalie Cross and get that money back before the authorities figure out what happened. Trevor looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Margaret, you can't be serious. This is way beyond. Beyond what? I snapped. Beyond saving my reputation? Beyond protecting my daughter from finding out her father was a thief and her husband is a criminal? Beyond making sure I don't spend my remaining years fighting fraud charges? I stepped closer to him. You helped create this mess, Trevor. And now you're going to help me clean it up. If you've ever felt backed into a corner, if you've ever had to choose between accepting destruction or fighting back, you know what I was feeling in that moment. Sometimes revenge isn't about hurting someone. Sometimes it's about taking back control when everything's been ripped away from you. Stay with me, because this story gets even more twisted. And make sure you check the description box for more stories about people who fought back when life tried to destroy them. Lawrence was watching me with something like respect in his eyes. What are you suggesting, Mrs. Patterson? I'm suggesting we hunt her down. Find out what she knows. Get the money back. And then we figure out how to bury this so deep that no one ever has to know what David did. What any of you did. That's obstruction of justice, Trevor said weakly. That's survival, I cut him off. And you're going to help me, or I'm going to Emily right now and tell her everything. Every single detail. Let her decide whether she wants to stay married to a man who helped steal from elderly retirees saving for their grandchildren's college funds. The threat hung there, and I could see Trevor calculating, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. Okay, I'll help. But I don't even know where to start looking for Natalie. I do, Lawrence said. He pulled out another piece of paper. I hired a private investigator. Former FBI. She tracked Natalie's movements after David died. Last confirmed location was 3 days ago in Portland, Maine. She's staying at a bed and breakfast under an assumed name, but she's still using a credit card tied to one of the shell companies. Sloppy. Then that's where we start, I said. We go to Portland. We find her. And we get answers. Trevor rubbed his face with both hands. This is crazy. This is absolutely insane. Maybe it was. Probably it was. But sitting in that study, surrounded by evidence of my husband's betrayal and my son-in-law's crimes, crazy felt like the only sane response. I'd spent 53 years being the dutiful wife. The supportive mother. The woman who kept everything running smoothly in the background while everyone else lived their lives. And where had it gotten me? A funeral. A lie. A photograph of the man I loved with another woman. No more. Whatever happened next, I was going to be the one making the choices. I was going to be the one in control. Even if it meant breaking every rule I'd ever lived by. Portland was cold and gray when we arrived the next morning. Lawrence had arranged for his private investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Rita Holloway, to meet us at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the bed and breakfast where Natalie was supposedly staying. Rita had retired from the FBI 5 years ago and now worked private cases for people who could afford her rates. She wore a leather jacket and had the kind of face that had seen too much but still maintained a dry sense of humor about it. So, Rita said, stirring sugar into her black coffee, we've got a widow, a son-in-law with questionable morals, and a wealthy client who wants his money back. This is either going to end very well or very badly. I'm voting for well, I said. I hadn't slept. The drive up from Connecticut to Maine had been tense and silent, Trevor driving while I sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, trying to reconcile the man I'd married with the man in that photograph. Lawrence had taken his own car, claiming he needed to make business calls, but I suspected he just didn't want to be trapped in a vehicle with the two of us. Natalie Cross is registered under the name Nicole Carter, Rita continued, sliding a thin file across the table. She's been moving every few days, never staying anywhere longer than a week. Classic behavior of someone who knows they're being hunted but isn't quite panicked enough to go fully underground. What do we know about her? Lawrence asked. Rita flipped through her notes. 32 years old. Degree in finance from a state school. Worked for 3 different investment firms before going freelance about 4 years ago. Clean record, no arrests. But she's got connections to some questionable offshore operations. The kind that specialize in making money disappear. How did David meet her? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Rita glanced at Trevor. Through him, actually. All eyes turned to Trevor. He shifted in his seat, his coffee untouched. She was a consultant on a project my company was working on. Cryptocurrency compliance stuff. I introduced her to David when he asked if I knew anyone who could help with international transfers. I swear I thought it was legitimate. When did it become not legitimate? Rita asked pointedly. Trevor didn't answer. He didn't have to. We all knew the answer. It became not legitimate the moment he'd helped David set up the first shell company. The moment he'd authorized the first transfer. All the rest had just been momentum, a snowball rolling downhill, gathering speed and mass until it was unstoppable. So what's the plan? I asked Rita. We can't just knock on her door and demand she give back $8 million. Actually, Rita said with a thin smile, that's exactly what we're going to do. But with a twist. She pulled out her phone and showed us a series of text messages. I've been communicating with Natalie for the past 24 hours, posing as a potential buyer for information she claims to have about David Patterson's financial network. She thinks I'm a journalist working on a story about financial fraud. And she's willing to talk? Lawrence sounded skeptical. For the right price, people will talk about anything. I told her I'd pay $50,000 for an exclusive interview and documentation. She agreed to meet this afternoon. Rita looked at me. But here's where you come in, Mrs. Patterson. I think the real story, the one Natalie will respond to, isn't money. It's guilt. Or fear. Or maybe just the need to confess. And nothing will crack someone open faster than facing the widow of the man they helped destroy. My stomach twisted, but I nodded. What do you need me to do? Be yourself. Be angry. Be hurt. Be real. Make her see what she's done to an actual human being, not just numbers on a screen. We walked to the bed and breakfast at 2 o'clock. It was one of those quaint Victorian places with a porch swing and flower boxes in the windows. The kind of place that advertised homemade breakfast and warm hospitality. It felt obscene that something so awful was hiding inside something so wholesome. Rita went in first, claiming she was checking in as a guest. A few minutes later, she texted that Natalie was in the sitting room on the second floor waiting. Lawrence and Trevor stayed outside, watching the exits in case Natalie tried to run. Which left me to walk up those creaking stairs alone, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. The sitting room was small and cozy, with 2 armchairs positioned near a fireplace. Natalie was sitting in one of them, looking out the window. When I walked in, she turned, and for a moment we just stared at each other. She was prettier in person than in the photograph. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, minimal makeup, dressed in jeans and a sweater like she was just a normal person on a normal day. Mrs. Patterson, she said, and her voice was softer than I'd expected. Younger. I didn't think you'd come yourself. Well, I said, taking the other chair, here I am. The wife of the man you helped steal from his clients. The wife of the man you were sleeping with. Here I am. Natalie flinched. I didn't know he was going to. I didn't think he'd. She stopped, took a breath. I'm sorry. That's inadequate, I know. But I am. Sorry for what, exactly? Sorry for the affair? Sorry for the theft? Sorry he died before you could run away together. All of it. She looked down at her hands, which were twisting in her lap. David told me you two had grown apart. That you were more like roommates than spouses. He said you'd understand eventually, that you'd be happier without him anyway. The words hit like slaps. Did he? He loved you though. That was the strangest thing. He'd talk about you sometimes, about your life together. About how you made him laugh, how you remembered everyone's birthday, how you still left little notes in his lunch bag. She looked up at me, and there were tears in her eyes. He loved you, and he still threw it all away. I couldn't understand it. Neither can I said quietly. But I'm not here for therapy. I'm here for the money. The $8 million that was transferred 2 days before David died. I know you have it. I know you used his credentials to authorize the transfer. What I don't know is whether you killed him to keep it all for yourself. Natalie's face went white. What? No. I would never. David's death was a heart attack. Natural causes. I wasn't even there. Convenient though. Wasn't it? Your partner gets cold feet, maybe threatens to confess, and suddenly he's dead and you're free to take everything. That's not what happened. Natalie stood up, pacing. David was panicking, yes. The scheme was falling apart. Lawrence Whitmore was asking questions. Trevor was trying to back out. David wanted to come clean, return the money, face the consequences. But I told him we were too deep. That confessing would just mean prison for both of us. So what did you do? Natalie stopped pacing and turned to face me, and in that moment, I saw something in her expression that made my blood run cold. Not guilt. Not remorse. but calculation. The look of someone who'd made a choice and was living with it. I told David I'd transfer everything to the offshore account, that we'd disappear. Start over somewhere with no extradition treaty. He said he needed to think about it, that he couldn't just abandon you and Emily. She swallowed hard. 2 days later, he was dead. And I transferred the money because I thought, what's the point now? He's gone. The damage is done. At least I could salvage something from the wreckage. You stole $8 million and fled, I said flatly. That's not salvaging. That's robbery. I prefer to think of it as taking what I was owed for the risk I took helping him. The casual cruelty of the statement made something snap inside me. I stood up, walked over to where Natalie was standing, and looked her dead in the eye. You're going to give that money back. All of it. You're going to provide documentation of every transfer, every shell company, every shred of evidence that proves what you and David and Trevor did. And then you're going to disappear for real, and you're never going to contact any of us again. Natalie laughed, but it was bitter. Or what? You'll go to the police? Report me? That implicates your dead husband and your son-in-law. It destroys your daughter's marriage and your own reputation. You've got no leverage here, Mrs. Patterson. You're right, I said. I don't have leverage. But I have something better. I have Detective Rita Holloway downstairs, recording every word you've just said. I have Lawrence Whitmore, who has enough money and influence to make your life a living hell in every jurisdiction on Earth. And I have Trevor, who's desperate enough to testify against you in exchange for immunity. The color drained from Natalie's face. You're bluffing. Am I? I pulled out my phone and played back the audio recording. Her voice, crystal clear, admitting to the theft, admitting to the affair, admitting to fleeing with the money. For a long moment, Natalie just stood there, trapped. Then she sank back into the chair, her face in her hands. What do you want from me? I told you. The money. The documentation. And your silence. I sat back down, feeling older and more tired than I'd ever felt in my life. I can't undo what David did. I can't bring him back and make him explain why he threw away everything we built. But I can protect my daughter from knowing her father was a fraud. I can protect the life we had, or at least the memory of it. Natalie looked up at me, mascara smudged under her eyes. And what happens to me? You disappear. You give back the money, you provide everything we need to return it to the clients who were robbed, and then you vanish. No charges. No scandal. Just gone. I leaned forward. Because here's the thing, Natalie. You were right about one thing. If this all comes out, it destroys everyone. But I've already lost everything that mattered to me. My husband. My trust. My sense of reality. So I've got nothing left to lose. You, on the other hand, still have your freedom. Your future. Whatever life you can build away from all this. That's what I'm offering you. The chance to walk away. She sat there for what felt like an eternity, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. Okay. I'll give you the account information. The transfers. Everything. But I need 24 hours to arrange things. 12 hours, I countered. And you don't leave Portland until it's done. Rita will be watching you. If you try to run, if you try to move any more money, we go to the authorities immediately and let the chips fall where they may. 12 hours, Natalie agreed quietly. I stood to leave, but paused at the door. Did he love you, David? Or was it just about the money and the thrill of getting away with something? Natalie looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine sadness in her eyes. I don't know. I think maybe he loved the idea of me. The idea of a different life. But in the end, when it all started falling apart, the person he called wasn't me. It was you. The night before he died, he called you. I heard him on the phone. Telling you he loved you, asking what you wanted for dinner. Like everything was normal. Like we didn't exist. She wiped at her eyes. So yeah, I think he loved you more. For whatever that's worth now. I left without another word. The next 12 hours passed in a blur. Natalie, true to her word, provided access to the offshore account. Rita worked her magic coordinating with Lawrence's attorneys and financial team to begin the process of returning the stolen funds to the clients who'd been robbed. It would take time, careful maneuvering to do it without raising red flags, but it was possible. Most of it, anyway. Some had already been spent, burned through in the months since the scheme had started. But enough remained to make most of the victims whole. Trevor signed a sworn statement admitting his role but claiming he'd been manipulated by David. It was a legal fiction, a convenient narrative that painted him as a foolish accomplice rather than an active partner. Lawrence agreed not to press charges in exchange for Trevor's cooperation and his promise to quietly repay his share of the missing funds over the next several years. And David. My David. We crafted a story that he'd made some risky investments that hadn't paid off, that he'd been trying to recover losses when his heart gave out. No theft. No affair. Just an overworked financial advisor who'd made mistakes under pressure. It was all lies, of course. Careful, calculated lies designed to protect everyone except the man who couldn't defend himself anymore. I told Emily a version of the truth 2 weeks later. Not all of it. Never all of it. But enough. I told her that her father had made some financial errors in his final months, that Trevor had been helping him fix things, and that it had all been resolved quietly to avoid damaging David's reputation and his client's confidence. She cried, upset that her father had been stressed and she hadn't known. Upset that Trevor hadn't told her. But she didn't know about Natalie. She didn't know about the $8 million or the shell companies or the photograph of her father's hand on another woman's back. And she never would. Because that was the gift I could give her. The gift of not having to reconcile the father she'd loved with the man he'd become. Trevor moved through our lives like a ghost after that. Polite. Distant. Always aware of the sword hanging over his head, the knowledge that I could destroy his marriage with a single conversation. Emily noticed the change in him, asked me if I thought they were okay. I told her that grief affects everyone differently, that sometimes it takes time to find your footing again after loss. More lies. But these ones felt necessary. Merciful, even. Lawrence Whitmore and I developed an unlikely friendship in the aftermath. He'd call every few weeks, checking in, making sure I was managing okay. He'd lost money in David's scheme, but he'd recovered most of it. More importantly, he said he'd gained respect for me. For the way I'd handled an impossible situation with pragmatism and steel. You're stronger than you know, Margaret, he told me once over coffee. David was a fool to risk losing you. Maybe. Or maybe David was just human. Flawed and weak and susceptible to temptation like everyone else. I wanted to hate him. Some days I did hate him. But most days I just felt tired. Tired of being angry. Tired of trying to understand. Tired of carrying the weight of secrets. It's been 6 months now since I buried David. 6 months since Lawrence Whitmore's urgent message turned my world inside out. 6 months since I learned that the man I'd loved for 53 years had been living a double life. The house feels different now. Smaller, maybe. Or maybe I've just expanded to fill the space he left behind. I've started taking art classes on Wednesday evenings. I've joined a book club. I've learned to change the oil in my car and fix the leaking faucet in the guest bathroom. All the little things David used to handle that I'd never bothered to learn because he was always there to do them. Emily's doing better. She and Trevor are trying. I don't know if their marriage will survive the weight of everything he's done, everything he's hidden. But that's not my burden to carry anymore. She's a grown woman. She'll make her own choices, just like I did. Sometimes late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about Natalie Cross. She disappeared like I'd told her to. Rita tracked her for a few weeks, just to make sure, and then lost the trail somewhere in South America. Brazil, maybe. Or Argentina. Somewhere with sunshine and beaches and no extradition treaty. I wonder if she thinks about David. If she regrets what happened or if she's just grateful to have escaped with her freedom intact. Mostly, though, I think about the choices we make. The little compromises that seem harmless at the time but compound into something unrecognizable. David didn't start out as a thief. He started out as a good man who made one bad decision, and then another, until he couldn't find his way back to who he'd been. And me? I'd always thought of myself as honest, ethical, the kind of person who followed rules and did the right thing. But when it came down to it, when I had to choose between truth and protecting my daughter, I chose the lie. I chose the cover-up. I chose revenge in the quietest, most calculated way possible, by erasing the evidence of David's betrayal and letting him be remembered as the man we'd pretended he was. I don't know if that makes me strong or corrupt or just pragmatic. Maybe it makes me all three. What I do know is this: betrayal doesn't just destroy trust. It destroys certainty. It destroys the clean narrative you've been telling yourself about who you are and what your life means. And once that's shattered, you're left to build something new from the pieces. Something that might not be as neat or as pretty, but that's at least honest about its own brokenness. If you've made it this far, if you've listened to this whole ugly, complicated story, thank you. Thank you for sitting with me in this mess and not looking away. Life isn't a fairy tale. It's not always clear who the villains are or what justice looks like. Sometimes it's just people making terrible choices and then trying to survive the aftermath. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever had to decide between truth and mercy, between revenge and peace, drop a comment and let me know how you handled it. Because I'm still figuring out if I made the right call. And I probably will be for the rest of my life. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about real people facing impossible choices, check the description box below. Because life is messy and complicated, and sometimes the only way through it is to hear from someone else who's walked the same dark path and made it out the other side. I don't know if I've made it out yet, but I'm still here. Still standing. Still taking it one day at a time. And some days, that's enough.